take that step and come find out who you really are. So many guys down there somewhere, they know who they are. You got to get rid of that noise, and I've never found a better place to shake off that noise and hear the truth that God wants for you to hear than this work in the Crucible Project.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Hello, everyone. This is Andy Spell, and I am with the Crucible Project Podcast. Today, I'm excited to let you know that we've got Mike Hall with us. Mike Hall is a good friend of mine. He leads a ministry that is really cool. And so, Mike, welcome.
Good to be here. Good to see you.
Would you please tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you live, what you do? Tell us a little bit about Mike so people will know as we visit today who I'm talking to.
Where I live is a little bit interesting because I live on a road named after my great-grandfather. So I lived on the family farm, and now I live adjacent to the family farm on additional family land. I knew my great-grandfather till I was 18. He lived to be 104. And so the reason I say that matters is the legacy I come from. I am the son of a football coach and a marketing person / school board member. When I was growing up, I was going to be a preacher. Everybody told me I was going to be a preacher. I was told to be a preacher, and then got into college and said, no, I don't think that's it. And I went to school to teach agriculture, and then still ended up being in ministry. I ended up teaching special education and then became a principal. I tell people I'm a recovering middle school principal. But for the last 25 years, 22 of it in my own business, I've been working with dads and kids in schools. So my job is to get dads more engaged in the education of kids. And we do that all over the country. We have programs that we do. We also have manuals to help other people do it. We do that in English and in Spanish. And so I'll see anywhere from 12 to 15,000 dads a year in person. In the last 2 weeks, I've been in Fort Worth, Dallas, East Texas, and Nebraska. So all the dads are not in the same place. I've been doing that for 22 years. Up until a couple of years ago, I had been married 35 years and went through a divorce. I have 2 grown sons, 28 and 33. Very proud of both those boys. One lives in Arkansas, one lives in Dallas. So I'm continuing to be able to work with dads, and I see that in the foreseeable future. I run a few cows on the family farm, have an Airbnb, and I work with an amazing ministry in West Africa called Village of Hopes. I try to stay out of trouble just with all the things that I'm doing.
Man, that's amazing. I love all the things that you're doing. I love to get on social media every once in a while and see what you're up to. So thank you for all that you're doing for the kingdom, for dads, for families. And I know that has a big impact everywhere you go. So, Mike, I would love to know, what was it that brought you to the Crucible Project? Why did you decide to go on a weekend?
I am somewhat famous in Crucible circles. I have been a good friend with the executive director, Roy Wooten, since my sophomore year in college. We had kids around the same time together. We've spoken together at national conferences. I'd been involved in men's ministry, some very good and some lacking. So I had a lot of judgment around that. And part of it was, I don't know that I'm really ready to face me, right? But me was not doing real well in a lot of ways. Promise Keepers helped me get started in fatherhood work. Made a big difference for me. I then got into Wild at Heart, which made a difference for me personally. I did a couple of other men's groups. So I had that. I was looking, and Roy, almost every week we'd talk on the phone, or every month, he's like, you really ought to come to a weekend. And again, I had that judgment in the back of my head because I'd been burned at church. I guess you would say somewhat jaded to some of the things that go on in evangelical churches, even though I was a part of leadership and I was in it. And I actually went to see Roy the day they asked him to be the leader of the Crucible Project. And Kamal Godfrey from Australia was there. A lot of guys know Kamal. Kamal's an amazing guy. And just met him, and he said, you really ought to do this. And I'm like, yeah, they've been telling me. But Kamal was working with dads in Australia, and so I just had a little bit of interest. And probably about 4 months later, my wife was having her sisters over. I was going to get kicked out of the house for a sister's weekend. I called Roy. I said, how you doing? What you up to? He said, well, we're getting ready to staff a Crucible weekend. And he would say this all the time, you ought to come. And I said, well, I don't have anywhere to go this weekend. And then he got all excited and he said, you ought to come. And I'm like, you know what? I need to. So the reason I say I'm famous is they always say, Mike Hall decided at noon on Friday to come to the weekend, which I would not suggest unless it just gets you there. But yeah, so I showed up at 7:00 that night and landed my grandfather, drove 4.5 hours because I needed it, wanted it, and I just stepped into it. It made a tremendous difference in my life. The work that I have continued to do with Crucible has sustained me. So my initial weekend was July 19. And it was a big weekend. I got to meet a lot of guys. And since then, I've staffed almost 20 weekends.
Wow.
Several different places around the country. And I love the work, but it has become my brotherhood. And it did not save me from myself in a lot of ways, except it prepared me to get to where I needed to get and the support that I needed around that. And so when I went through a divorce, I would not have made it, and I would not have been the man I wanted to be in that process had it not been for this work.
Yeah, thank you. So when you showed up on the weekend, did you know what you wanted?
I had struggled with a lot of passivity, but also pornography, and didn't want to be involved in that, didn't think that was okay. And I was looking to know who I really was because I knew that wasn't me. Right? It was the thing I struggled with. It was the things that I tried to deal with. That's not who I am, but I got to figure out who I am. So I was looking for that, and that sounds awfully vague, but that's where I was.
No, I get that. When you thought about who you were, what messages did you hear going into that weekend? What were those things telling you were?
I was weak. I was sinful. I was never going to be able to kick, the issue around pornography, the issue I had around food, even though I'd had some really good success, about getting in better physical shape. So that was a cloud in my marriage. And I was letting the church, the culture in some ways, my wife and family tell me who I was. And I wasn't listening to God telling me who I was, right? It's like, I've been successful. People look at you and they're like, this guy's doing okay. He's kind of cool. He's kind of got to get whatever. I mean, I'm not cool. I don't know if I ever qualified for cool. But they didn't know what was going on the inside. And so what I found on the weekend was, who does God say that I am?
Yeah.
And I found it that weekend, and I find it every weekend that I staff.
Man, me too. Absolutely. I also find that in all of that, the enemy will take a hold of any doubt, any small thing, and will just magnify it. On the weekend that I went on, man, those messages from the enemy were just screaming, and I couldn't hear the truth from God because I'd let the enemy grab a hold of what I believed I was.
Right.
And he was screaming pretty loud.
Yeah, and those messages, there was a part of me, I know that's not who I am. But like you said, there's so much other noise. And it's not always malicious on anybody else's part. I grew up in the church. I was a leader in my church. But even though it wasn't malicious, there's messages we get from the form and function. It's just the nature of being in a human organization. I really appreciate what you said because, you just hear that faint, dead of the night. That's not who you are. This is who you are. All right, get up one morning knowing who I am, and by the time you get out the door, everybody else or somebody else has told you. A look from your teenage son, a look from your disappointed wife. And I tried to share that with a lot of people. I wanted freedom from that. And what I found was nobody wanted to talk about anything because we don't want to talk about our own sin, but that's also that noise. You must be the only one. Nobody else struggles with this. Everybody else is okay. What's wrong with you? And then what I found by saying the truth was, first off, here's what it really is and here's what it isn't. And here's who I am and here's who I am not. I told the enemy, you're a liar. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you got to the weekend, how did God show up for you?
Being in all these different men's ministries, I had some great experiences. And like I said, I had some judgment about some other experiences. I've worked with almost 300,000 men face to face. So I had to turn off my facilitator brain and become the student. And just what I tell guys now is trust the process. So I stepped into that process, and what I found was truth. I found grace. I found brutal honesty. I was always looking for what's the reality of where we're at. I like Christian music, but some of our Christian radio stations want to act like the world is not what it is.
Yeah.
Right. And we do the same at church when we smile at each other and say we're fine. And I finally came to a place where guys said, I'm not fine. I haven't been fine, but for the grace of God is the only fine I am. And really, that honesty with that grace had a huge difference in my weekend and then ever since then.
Yeah. And watching the other men go through it, So you're there with other men, you're there with the staff, you're there with the participants, watching them tell their stories, watching them wrestle with God and wrestle with things. What did that do for you in that place of grace and truth that is so big on these weekends? That grace and truth is something like I'd never experienced. What did it do watching these other men go through their stories and their own life messages?
So it was amazing, and it was heartbreaking and exhilarating at the same time. And it was heartbreaking in some ways to know what all these different men had been through. As a guy that worked with men, all the evidence was there. I'd worked nose to nose with guys. I knew what they had dealt with. And here I was in a room full of guys as participants with me that were facing that same stuff again and bringing their truth and wrestling with it and getting grace. And then also in the teaching and the things that the staff brought, these guys are going, this is the reality of our lives. And that brotherhood of being in a room full of men that will be honest, brutally honest, and share things that I'm like, okay, wow, yeah, I feel that. I have felt that, or I've never felt that, but I get it. And these guys get me. And like you said, you've had some guys that have been through stuff I can't imagine going through. I saw so many guys lay those burdens down like I did. I felt it just fall off of me. And throughout the weekend, and just watching guys walk out 1,000 pounds lighter by the end of the weekend was amazing.
Yeah. One of the things I struggled with was I grew up in a good home. I grew up with parents who loved me. And so I was thinking, I don't have a reason to be struggling because I was kind of given a really good start. Were my parents perfect? No, but man, it was pretty good. But then I realized that my own pain came from other places, and it doesn't always have to be a bad dad or a bad mom. Or pain comes from pain, and it comes from church, or it comes from messages, or it comes from others.
I think that's one of the bigger lies, right? You had all this, so you should be fine. The church where I was a leader, my great-grandfather had been a leader, right? And this is even the other great-grandfather, not even the one I talked about. So I've got this legacy on both sides. And my parents were married. I was the first kid, so I can tell you all the mistakes they made that somehow they didn't make with my younger brother. He didn't have the same parents. But that was one of those first lies. It's like, I had a great dad, have a great mom, but they're human people in a fallen world. And I think that's one of the things that I was getting from church is like, well, Jesus, so Jesus wouldn't let anything bad happen to you. And I'm like, I don't see that promise anywhere. And I think that's that part of disillusionment. That's that message we've got to be careful of, because we get that message and we're like, okay, then I must not have Jesus because stuff's going on. And it's like, no, that's the biggest lie.
Right.
It is Jesus saves, but yeah, you got to go through this fallen world with fallen people. So as I went into separation and divorce, I started therapy. In the very first session, I tell my therapist, I come from a pretty good family. And he goes, so tell me what a pretty good family is. And I would say stuff and his eyebrows would go up. And I'm like, oh, and we knew we were a jacked up family. We say we put the fun in dysfunction. But yeah, and not that anything was horribly detrimental, but with my work now and now being the father of 2 adult men, I'll tell you something that I got to do. My dad passed away after a heart transplant. He lived a couple years, but he couldn't get over the infection. But on their 40th wedding anniversary, we already knew he had some heart trouble. And we said, let's throw him a 40th instead of waiting for a 50th because Dad's got some issues. And so I did the slideshow. And here I am working with all these fathers that are younger. And now I'm looking at pictures of my father as a young man, even younger than I was at the time of doing the slides, right? And I realized I'm like, he didn't have any more of a clue than I did. Right. And I had clues because I had a good dad. He had a good dad. But no matter what, it's hard work. And even as we see guys coming into the weekend that we now staff have such a tender heart for dads that are trying to be a good man, trying to be a good husband, trying to be a good father, and nobody's telling them the truth, right? Everybody's fine but you is what they think. That's what I thought. And the other part is to be in that circle and to be around guys and go, yeah, I'm worried about that too. Yeah, I struggle with that too. And to be so brutally honest, but yet be in a place where it's safe to do so.
Yeah.
The way that we walk into an initial weekend, it is the safest place you can be because there is both truth and grace.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, my parents were good, but they were wounded.
Right.
And their wounds were significant enough that it made my dad one way and my mom another way. But their parents were wounded. And now I've got 3 children. I was wounded and my wife was wounded, and we wounded our kids.
Yes.
And we say this to our kids all the time. We are sorry for the things, man, we
Yes.
messed up with. I am sorry for that. And if we have to pay for a therapy,
Yes.
man, we're happy to do that because you're probably going to need it. And we did some things that we had no clue
Right.
we were doing. And I was sitting there probably most of the time thinking, man, I'm being a really good dad.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm
I
doing
mean,
this really well.
Yeah, some of the things I've talked to my sons about that I've apologized, they didn't even remember. And I'm like, yeah, but it's probably in your subconscious psyche and it's still jacking with you. But some of the things that we have talked about, like you said, I thought I was doing a pretty good job. I thought that was the right thing to do. And either through our conversations with them or just looking back, I watched them get wounded in the moment and remembered, yeah, I'll remember that wound too, and try to help. But you also know, like you said, as a dad, you've also got to go, you know what? I got to get up and try it again. I lived about 200 yards from my dad before he passed. And as my kids were coming up, I'd go over and see him in the morning, have coffee or something and say, Dad, I'm so sorry. And he's like, what? I said, for being 14.
Yeah.
For being 15. For you, thank you for not killing me. And then as my sons are 28 and 33, I have to go back to the grace that my dad showed me.
Yes.
And then in this work, giving grace to my own father that I knew wanted the best for me, had his own wounds, but also didn't know what to do. The systems and everything that we've gone through, whether it be the culture that we live in or the schools or the church or whatever, all the things, you got to know that people have come through that and that forms who they are.
Yeah. My youngest had dyslexia and Erlin, scotopic, all this stuff. And man, he has at times come back and said, man, I'm so sorry for all the crap I gave you about doing homework. Because we literally would have knockdown dragouts. You're not getting up from this till you get your homework done. I don't care what you want to do. And they would just intensify and know all that. So I want to pivot a little bit. So you're doing work with fathers, and I love that you're doing that. Again, at the end, we're going to let people know where they can find you because this work you're doing is really, really important. But I also know that you went through a divorce after you went through the weekend. And for anybody out there who has walked through a divorce, how did doing soul work on yourself help you navigate this very difficult time?
We had been through counseling a few times in our 35 years of marriage. I told our counselor, I struggle with this from time to time. And as a Christian therapist, he says, I don't think that's it. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it is because that's what we've been arguing. That's what hurts her. That's what she brought up. But even in that counseling, she would not bring up and he would not say the word, right? They wouldn't talk about it. And so that's another message I got was, number one, we can't talk about it and you're on your own. I found out later that was kind of the idea that if you were just loved better, then you wouldn't struggle with lust or pornography or any of that. And I knew that wasn't true and tried to convince my wife it's not about you. Now, that hurt her and I honor that hurt and I actually honor her reasons for not being able to stay married to me. And so as we separated, I started doing all kind of work, but I could bring that to men in the group that I was in, and they would walk alongside me, and there was not pity because many of them had been through it. There was truth. I was held accountable for my actions. That's what I had been begging for. The day we separated, and my wife said, this is a deal breaker for me. I said, I get it. I understand. It's been a deal breaker for me, right? I was devastated, to say the least, but I also had this huge weight lifted because of that truth. I knew that I was going to speak out about it. I knew I was going to step down from my church leadership. I had spoken to my sons about it a little bit, but I knew the weight was lifted because I was no longer keeping that struggle inside and had no help around it. So having had Crucible behind me, it also made it easier to step into that and take accountability and say, here's what I'm doing. So I went to work, started doing the work, owned it, continued to own it. But I had also grace in the fact that guys said, that's not who you are. And also having guys that had conquered it because I didn't believe anybody could, right? I had and have great success, which I never thought I would have. And I would tell you the root of that is to know who I really am. Mm-hmm. And so the disdain that my wife had for me at different times, I knew that wasn't me. When I stepped up and spoke to the church about it, I knew who I was because I'd done that work. And I was very blessed because I never felt shamed or shunned by my church. I will tell you, they didn't know what to do with me because I continued to show up. And so they didn't want to get rid of me, and they weren't ashamed of me. And they showed me an incredible grace, but nobody knew what to do. There was just this awkwardness because so many people admit, maybe even repent, which I did, and then they kind of just step away. And I'm like, no, I'm still here. I'm still the guy. I still am trying to save my family, trying to be the right guy. I'm not going to quit talking about it. Here's who I am. Here's what I have done. And that's, all those things. So Crucible helped me in the fact that they walked alongside me and made me accountable. But they also walked alongside me and said, we know who you are. So my message when I come out of my first weekend is, who are you?
Yeah.
I used to be redheaded, and I felt like my parents were so proud of their little redheaded boy. I knew I was God's little redheaded boy, right? I knew who I was. And so Crucible has supported me in that and continued to show me. And as I went through that and let the failure of a divorce, the stigma of divorce, particularly in an evangelical conservative church, and to let all that pile up, it never weighed me down, because I had guys saying, that's not it. That's not who you are. Don't listen to that. And again, not that I wasn't accountable, but it was that balance of truth and grace. The truth is, this is what I've done and this is the hurt I've caused. The grace was, that's not who you are. That's not what God's about. God still sees you. God still has you. God still redeems you. And I got that message consistently, both from my brothers and from the work, because I would see other men find redemption. And so I would experience my own redemption again, right?
100%. And I think for a while, there was a feeling that even though you repent, stay in the mire and the mud, you still need to stay down. Life is over. You suck, blah, blah, blah. And there comes a time when we repent, we admit, we are accountable, we own, yes, this is what I did. And then we get to move on because the grace of God covers it. We are forgiven. Christ went to the cross for that. We are forgiven, and we get to live life again. Mike, what would you say to a man going through what you've gone through and the pain, who says, man, I don't think I deserve happiness or grace. I don't deserve any of that. Mike, you don't know what I've done. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I've sat in circles where guys have had to admit, and I've gotten to the point where I don't rate any of it, because it's all things that separate us from God, right?
Right on.
But also, I know what you've done comes from where you came from and what you went through, and that's still not who you are, right? Now, again, we're all responsible for our choices and actions and all of that.
And there's some consequences that are worse than others, 100%.
Yeah, but that's not who you are. And the interesting part about being around guys as you continue to do this work is we all pretty often admit how screwed up we are. Right? Effed up, I think, is a word that gets used every once in a while. I won't use any more for the podcast. But it's like, you sit in a circle of guys that you love dearly, and you sit around and you go, you guys are some effed up dudes. And then you also realize, and yet you're also God's little redheaded son. Right. And you're God's giant of a man. And you're my brother, and you're as redeemed as I am, and you're as redeemed as anyone else. My Crucible weekend did not save me from some of my addiction. I had to do additional work on that.
Right.
But it set me up to be in a place, in an environment where that work could happen. I did not want to lose my family. I hate that I'm divorced, and yet I am eternally grateful to my now ex-wife, because I did not have the guts to step into it. It wasn't safe to admit those things, because they would either keep you in the dirt or they have to ignore it to think you have grace, and it's neither one of those. This is the challenge in my life. This is the God that's going to save me from it. I am the fallen person that is redeemed, but we want to act like, well, you can't be both. I'm like, that's exactly the whole truth of the matter. And so, yeah, I would tell guys, you are exactly that person that's done those things. You begin to understand, why did that happen? Why would I go that way? I have guys say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to get out. And then you begin to realize, wait, that's not who I am.
Yeah.
But if this is who I am, what should I be doing? How should I be doing it? And that's not a, check all the boxes kind of a thing. That I would tell you, for me, I finally found my being instead of my doing.
Right.
I was the guy that checked all the boxes at church and showed up and did all the things. And the whole time I wasn't being who God would have me to be. So Crucible helped me find out who I was supposed to be. And then all these other pieces fall in place. And so in my relationships now with my sons, with other brothers, even with the people that at church don't always know what to do with me, I know who I am. And so I can stand in that, because my message is now coming from God, who's calling me to be. And as I'm in a new dating relationship, even that is stronger, because I want to have challenges. I want to know where I'm headed in this thing, but I now know who I am. And so that keeps so much of that other garbage that we've all dealt with in our lives out. And it helps me make decisions as God would have me to make, based on who I am as opposed to what I'm doing. And I would tell guys, is like, take that step and come find out who you really are. So many guys down there somewhere, they know who they are. And like, you got to get rid of that noise. And I've never found a better place to shake off that noise and hear the truth that God wants for you to hear than this work in the Crucible Project.
And to find out who we really are, I just believe it because Jesus did it on earth. You got to have a community that helps you do it. When I don't remember who I am, I need others around me to remind me. Just, hey, tell me again, who am I? And they help me get there, you know?
Yeah, you and I both shown up on weekends to work together, and one of us or both of us have been in that spot, and somebody, whether it was you and I or somebody else, has come along and said, hey, I see you. I know who you are. Because the noise doesn't stop. The noise is always going to be there. So what are you going to flood that with? Also, what's your filter? Because men are also my filter. Like, why are you listening to that? So as I went through my divorce and was getting messages literally and or inadvertently, I had guys that would come along and say, why do you think that? Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, well, like this, because everybody's like, no, what does God say? And again, I didn't get any free passes because I was wanting one. There wasn't just some guy coming alongside going, oh, you're fine. You know, because he didn't want to deal with his own stuff. This guy's dealing with his. He lets me call him on his stuff. He's calling me on mine. That has made the biggest difference. And so people say, well, I'm in community. Are they telling you who you are besides being fine? Are they telling you, I see you hurting and struggling with this, and I see your heart for God, or I see your heart for your family, and I know that's not what you want to be doing because I know who you are.
Right.
And when you begin to separate those out and have somebody to see you for who you are as opposed to what you're doing, I think that's what makes all the difference in the Crucible Project as well.
Man, 100%. This has been so good. So please tell everybody one more time, if they want to know about the things you do with fathers, where can they find that?
Everything on social media is at Strong Fathers, one word. Our website is strongfathers.com. We need to do some more work on it, but there's resources for fathers at strongfathers.org. But yeah, if you Google J. Michael Hall, which is my official fancy name that gets me in the door, if you Google J. Michael Hall and Strong Fathers, you'll know more than you ever cared to know about me, for sure. Maybe more than I want people to know after even spilling my guts here, right? But there's a lot of articles I've written, videos we've done. If you look up Strong Fathers and the initial J, Michael Hall, I want people to know this work has always been about toe-to-toe, nose-to-nose, grassroots stuff, and that's what I love. Crucible Project is man-to-man. Crucible Project is in the dirt. I think about driving that plow through the sand over here. You drive that plow through the dirt, and when you look at the plow shined up.
That's right.
I think that's what we do at Crucible as well.
I love it. Mike, thanks for being with us. I've loved this conversation. You're a good man, and I cannot wait to see you again face to face.
You bet. See you soon, brother. Thank you.
God bless.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. Or if you're ready to get started on your transformational journey right now, you can connect with one of our Crucible certified coaches for a free 30-minute session at thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. That's thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. If you like what you heard, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for listening.